Today's edition of Back Roads of Illinois. We were bringing you lasted for farming sources and information sponsored by AgriGold. This is the Markets Club podcast. We were talking about the crop tours for this week in the Midwest and Central Illinois with Dan Hussey from Zenra Hedges. His team is on the ground now in Iowa and South Dakota in the west leg of the tour. We were talking with Dan Hussey on the Markets Club podcast.
Table discussion. In the heartland of America, it is often a source of information, a way for farmers to keep up on crop conditions in their neighbor's field. But in a world where agricultural trade encompasses the globe, it falls far short of any real value. These people are in search of a broader perspective. They are floor traders from the Futures Exchange in Chicago, grain merchandisers from the United States, Japan, and Germany, U.S. Department of Ag officials, agricultural meteorologists, and journalists. The one common thread they share is a desire for more information on the American corn crop. But sitting around a table is not how they have come by such valuable information. They are agrivisor crop tour scouts and have spent the day on the road and in the cornfield gathering vital statistics on the 1989 corn crop.
Start with that one. We won't count that one. We'll start with this plant. You'll hold that tape measure. I'll sing out. We got to put it.
Tour host and agrivisor market analyst Jim Quinton is making corn yield calculations. To ensure randomness, the calculations are made the same distance into the field each stop, 36 paces in from the edge. He lays off a one-row strip, equal to 1/1000th of an acre. In this particular case, the test strip is 17 1/2 feet long. The number of plants in the strip are counted and multiplied by 1,000 to obtain a total plant count for the entire acre.
19 ears and 1/1000th of an acre, so that's got an 18,000 plant population. For a random selection, we'll take the 7th, the 11th, and the 13th ear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Feel that down, look at the grain in that cob.
The number of ears on the plants are counted, and then once again, to ensure randomness, the same ear numbers from each strip are taken for the final counts in the yield calculations.
8, 9, 10, number 11.
In this case, the ear numbers are the 7th, 11th, and 13th ears in the test strip.
And now number 13. These are 3 randomly selected ears in the sample. And this one is 4, 8, 10, 12, 14, 18. We got 18, 18, and 16. That's an average of 17.3. And the length of kernels on the cob here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
For the final calculation, the number of kernels around each and the length of each of the 3 ears are counted and averaged. Then all the calculations are translated onto the corn yield calculator. It is actually a slide rule.
30 for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 38. Call it 38. And on the calculator, then, if we use number of rows of kernels around the cob, it averaged 17.3. And the length of kernels was about 38. That's at 38 on about 17.3. Down there. There we go. And we had 19,000 plants. That's 139 bushels to the acre. Assuming kernel weight will be normal weight. That's what this corn yield calculator cannot do, is tell you whether the kernel size itself is going to be bigger than, smaller than, or about normal.
From here, it's another 20 miles on the road to the next stop. The car talk centers on one thing, crop conditions. Jim Quinton.
If dry matter accumulates the corn kernel at the rate of 10% or 1% per day for the first 10 days, 2% per day for the next 40 after pollination, and 1% per day for the final 10 days, that'd be 60 days span to have 100% dry matter accumulation from pollination to black layer fulfillment. If this corn is pollinated on August 20th, and you got a killing freeze on September 30th, at the 70th percentile of dry matter accumulation is the day the closeout dies. That calculated yield for that crop was 192 bushels. That kept it down to 130 bushels of yield right down a minute overnight. That's all that field would have. And it'd be 130 bushels of some of the most ungodly crap you ever took to an elevator.
20 miles later, it's out of the car and into the field again, where we find just such a situation.
Depending on how these latest stock correlate, could make almost 30 bushel difference in the yield of this particular field. And it's very, very late, and I think we have to question whether even the late stocks will make it before a frost.
As you come up on the field from the road in here, this field looks like a good field. If you're just driving by it, I mean, it's probably 12 feet tall or better, and green as can be, and there's plenty of moisture out here. Throw you?
Well, that's the old windshield method. And the old windshield method is okay for vegetative matters, but it's not okay for counting grain.
Just over 40 participants rode in 8 cars on this 6-day, 3-day crop tour. What they found was a crop better than suspected, holding its own on the drought-stricken western corn belt and coming out in the rain-soaked east. One other note from the tour. We were reminded of a childhood rule. Look both ways before you cross the road. I'm Todd Gleason.
You know that I am talking to Dan Hussey today. We were talking about the Midwest Crop Tour. But in 1989, there were no formal crop tour except for the commodities firm from Agrivisor in Bloomington. However, Todd Gleason from the University of Illinois, he got a chance to catch up on the crop tour in central Illinois with them in '89. Yields wasn't interested since then, but now that the USDA has changed, the retrospective about the yields trends are since now. Otherwise, we were talking about the yields trends with technology and information on the spot. Now, with all the yield trends in bullish, however, we know that it's not clear on the report if it doesn't look any conclusion about the yields trends in the field. However, must watch it again for next month. Thanks, Todd Gleason from the University of Illinois Extension for this audio. The crop tour is underway in the Midwest and central Illinois with the weather and humid. His team is on the field for right now. Otherwise, we're joining with Dan Hussey from Zenra Hedges on back roads of Illinois. Dan, how are you today? And welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Caesar. It's always a pleasure to join in on these discussions with you about what's going on in the ag markets. And like you already mentioned, my team's out there, boots on the ground. Both our chief market strategist, Ted Seifert, and chief market analyst, Karen Braun, are out on the Western crop tour, giving us those reports every day and checking in with us as much as they can. But I'll be honest, I'm getting as much more information than anyone else is on social media because those two are just busy out in the field counting kernels and pods to try to wrap up crop tour. How have you been? It's been a little bit since we've spoken. I'm pretty good on my end, but we'll see what the markets have done for us.
Great to hear from you again for the crop tour. I am pretty good. Sure. Dan, what is your thoughts on the corn yield from the world supply and demand report versus the crop tour is underway right now?
Yeah, I think corn yields could be prefaced by that initial StoneX report before the WASDE, where StoneX reported their survey findings with that 188 national average yield or their anticipation of it. The market, or you could see on social media, everybody thought they were crazy, and lo and behold, the USDA comes out with that number almost on the mark. I think what we're seeing across the Midwest right now and on that Eastern belt is a little bit of a struggle on the East, but maybe being made up for with some of those acres on the West. Illinois is a little bit of a mixed bag, but and some of those problems in Indiana and Ohio seem to be being made up by Nebraska and South Dakota right now. Minnesota's come in a little bit softer today, it looks like, on both bean and corn numbers, but not bad, like better than the last couple years, but not their best we've ever seen. It's still a great crop from what we're hearing. And I think that confirmation has kept a little bit of a fundamentally bearish tone under the markets, but boy, price action the last couple days has been pretty well supported.
Do you prefer to have a harvest in the field with the reality check for the yields?
Yeah, I think that will be where everything right comes to fruition. Pod counts are really good right now, right? But a lot of agronomists say without that final rain, you're not going to finish out the crop as strong as possible, and that's going to hit yields at the end. Corn, you could say the same in some places that a little bit of extra rain here to get things finished off, and to keep kernels from abortion would be a good thing to finish and keep the year strong. We're getting some heat across the Midwest. It's supposed to hit 90 degrees today around my neck of the woods, but it's still cooling down at night. And that dew point is keeping a lot of moisture. And like you pointed out, the humidity out there is keeping things pretty well humid and, drought free, so to speak, for the time being.
Yeah, with the weather was kind of normal for this year.
Hmm. It has been.
The fundamentals is probably going to be in downside in the beans markets for profit taking. But the beans crop are looking good along with the corn. Could you tell us what's your thoughts on the beans markets with the fundamentals?
Yeah, soybeans right now have kind of a air of disappointment when it comes to demand. Chinese demand and Asian and global demand for U.S. soybeans has been a little bit missed. There's definitely hope that because South America could, be seizing up or have sold everything they could have at this point, that some of that demand will be turned back to the United States. But that lack of demand and, soybeans without China, what do we have, right? I will say the last couple of days, particularly today, we've seen a big move in bean oil, which is changing things in anticipation of an EPA and standards release that may actually bring biofuels and particularly soy oil to the front again for domestic demand for biofuel mandates, which would be good to see. And I think the market's getting excited by that in the short term. But like you said, fundamentally, there's a lot of acres out there. We've got a gangbuster crop in the ground, and we're starting to see from Crop Tour the reality check that, okay, there is a good crop there. And if it finishes strong, it could be one of the best yet. If it doesn't finish strong, we could still taper off of yields. We may have seen the highest yield number from that USDA report here in August, which, for all intents and purposes, I think is at least where you got to throw the dart on the board right now. And are we going to be above or below that number? A lot of guys think obviously the USDA number is different than where we will fall in terms of actual yields at the end of the year, but it gives you a good barometer for what to expect. And you definitely need to expect, I think a 180 figure at this point for where we'll find ourselves, and that will be proven or not in the fields at harvest.
Do you have
And
any
mhm,
concerns about demand for next couple months right now with China? Brazil has a great crop.
yes, and you hit the nail on the head. Until
Uh,
China eats their fill of Brazilian soybeans, U.S. market is just going to be, a second thought. We have seen increased demand from the rest of the world, though, for both corn and soybeans. If you take China out of U.S. demand numbers, and you look at the aggregate demand from, the rest of the world, we've actually increased quite a bit for both soybean and corn demand over the last several years, which is good to see, including this year. But still, China being the bulk of that, of that end user means that we need to either find a trade deal with China or wait for them to inevitably need to come back and buy those beans when either Brazil runs out or boats get too jammed up at Brazilian ports, or the real and the dollar move enough to where U.S. beans are more advantageous. But China will wait as long as they can, and we unfortunately just don't know how many beans they have, and corn for that matter too, on hand to wait out till their next purchasing comes through. We saw some good exports in the near term today. That was a good promising note. So I think there is hope for both domestic demand and an uptick in exports in the near term. But until we get through the Brazilian, until we get through that Brazilian pile of soybeans, it's going to be, tough to rely on Chinese demand for U.S. beans.
Do you think that farmers are watching for Brazil with their monster crop for this fall and winter, Dan?
I definitely think there's a lot of eyes on that. It's tough though, because none of us up here in America, North America for that matter, have good, really good reporting unless you've got family, folks, or friends down south to get you that information. We're all relying on the same reports that we all see. And, they're coming from agencies that have their own interests. So it's hard to get a good grasp of where, the Brazilian crop is along throughout the year. And that's twofold. One, because of the information out of Brazil, can we rely on it? And two, they don't have the infrastructure we do of reporting. So there's so much of real Brazil that's underreported at times that we unfortunately just don't know. But my eyes are definitely down and watching boat traffic at ports, watching some of the bean and sales to China that do get reported, and seeing any kind of slowdown there would anticipate the uptick here in the United States.
Yeah, that's true. In conclusion, do you have any thoughts about the weather in northern Illinois nearby Chicago and southern Wisconsin for this crop?
Yeah, we started off, I think, really good, and then we had that bit of, I don't want to call it a drought per se, but it was drought-like conditions for a good chunk of July. We just kept getting missed by water, and any kind of rains we saw in my neck of the woods, and I'm, straight west of Chicago in that area myself. There aren't too, there is actually a cornfield here in DuPage County. Only a couple, but there are a few I ride my bike past on a regular basis. And it looked really good, but I have a sneaky suspicion if I go out in that field and take a look under a couple years here, I'm going to see some of that drought tip back and other pollination issues that you'd expect because we had those kind of missed rains. Thunderstorms rolled through, but we just, they were intermittent, right? Not everybody got that inch and a half at times. And that caused, I think, a couple issues to, maybe make that northern Illinois pocket and southern Wisconsin come up a little softer on yields and have some of the issues. But then, again, you got to say that, hey, take it with a grain of salt, because it looks like the rest of the country might have made up for it. And it was still a good year, even with, a little bit of a miss there, I think, on the weather here towards the tail end of pollination.
How is the weather in northern Illinois nearby Naperville and Oswego?
It's not too far. I mean, about an hour's drive between Lake Oswego and Naperville to give folks a couple, to keep well, maybe an hour and a half to two, but to give people a good what do you call it, barometer.
Yeah, it is pretty busy for this week.
I would imagine so.
What is your final thoughts on this crop tourist for right now?
Yeah, I think I'm going to be interested to see where those final numbers come in. I think it was surprising, to see the Eastern numbers come in when throughout the day you were thinking, and the pictures maybe you saw on Twitter and social media were, oh wow, there's a lot of fungal issues and a lot of issues out there. But then the numbers at the end of the day were better than expected. At least I guess they were to me at first. And now the Western Belt is looking looking the same. I think it's going to be important to see where those numbers come out. But I do want to preface that the tour numbers are special. We have to remember that they're taken in a specific statistical way. It's not the end all be all of where yields will come in. And it is supposed to give you a good statistical representation of where we are relative to each year's statistical collection of this data. So, the idea is that if we see a 4% increase in yield year over year in the numbers, we could expect a potential, standard deviation in yields this year as well to that capacity. Things will probably be better to the 4% category is the idea. These aren't raw numbers to just say, oh, it comes out at 181 in the pod, and we don't even give a yield for beans for that reason, because beans aren't made yet. Pods are just setting. But those pod counts do at least attribute to, right, at the end of the day, more pods will very likely equate to more better beans and more beans if you get that good raining finish. So watch the weather. Beans are made in August and here into the first week of September for those that had to replant or got in late. And we're seeing, watch for that final rain that a lot of guys are talking about could come and sweep through. You get 1 inch of rain on this crop. I think that finishes things off, 1 to 2 maybe, finishes things off for the soybeans in a lot of places. And you are going to see those very big bean pod numbers translate to a very big bean yield. We are softer on those acreage numbers, so or bigger, I'm sorry, in the acreage numbers for beans. So we'll see if that translates here, or if there's any comments regarding where they think acres could be coming in from analysts that were out on tour and what have you. But at the end of the day, I think look for the confirmation of the fact that there is a good crop out there. Be aware that that does put a bearish mentality under these markets. But hey, we've had a lot of bearish news and a lot of bearish underpinnings over this last year. And look at where we are. We're still fighting above $4 and around $4 for corn, and still, now back above $10 for soybeans. And in my humble opinion, that's very impressive for what is supposed to be one of the biggest crops we've seen in a long time, if not ever. So that being said, I do think that there could be lower prices in the forecast and in the future. But at some point here, I do think we're getting down to where there's real value, and we'll probably see some longer term support. I don't think corn can stay below 4 forever or for very long. Likewise with beans around $10 in the current global market.
Where people can find you for your consulting services for their grain marketing.
Yeah, you can find us at Zaner.com or Zaner Ag Hedge on Twitter, Facebook, all those good places. My name's Dan Hussey, everybody, and pleasure and thank you to have me once again, Caesar.
Thanks, Dan.
Yes,
This
thank you. Good sir.
conversation was fantastic for today.
Great. Yes, thank you very much for having me. It was a great talk. And let me know if when you want to do it again.
Dan Hussey from Zenra Hedges on back roads of Illinois. I am Caesar Delgado. You have a great day.